And when this starts to make sense, you realize something that completely changes how you operate. Money does not respond to isolated effort. It responds to consistent patterns. That means it doesn't matter how hard you work in a single day, or even in a week. What truly matters is the pattern you sustain over time. And this is where most people fail again. They try to fix money with isolated actions. An intense effort here, a small saving there, a temporary gain. But without consistency, nothing lasts. Andrew Carnegie understood that wealth is not an event. It is a system. And a system requires repetition, requires discipline, requires predictability. Because money thrives on flow. And flow only exists when there is pattern. Now think about this clearly. If the way you earn money is unstable, your financial life will be unstable. If the way you spend is uncontrolled, your money disappears. If the way you decide is emotional, your results will be inconsistent. Everything is pattern. Everything is repetition. Everything is accumulated behavior. And that's why trying to make a financial leap almost never works. Because leaps don't sustain. Systems do. Now let's go deeper. There is a silent mistake in how you see money. You try to control it without first controlling yourself. But money amplifies behavior. If you are disorganized, with more money, you'll be more disorganized. If you are impulsive, with more money, you'll be more impulsive. If you lack discipline, more money will only accelerate the problem. And that's why many people rise and then fall. Because their financial level increased, but their mental level didn't. Carnegie knew that growth without structure is unstable, and instability always collapses. Now understand this deeply. You don't need to chase money. You need to become someone who naturally attracts and sustains it. And that happens through 3 pillars: clarity, discipline, direction. Clarity to understand how money works. Discipline to sustain the right behavior. Direction to apply it strategically. Without these 3, everything becomes trial and error. And trial and error does not build wealth. Now here's a practical shift. Stop asking, how do I make more money? Start asking, how do I become more valuable? Because that question puts you on the right path. It removes you from scarcity and moves you into growth. Because value can expand. And when your value expands, your income follows. Now understand this. Money is a reflection. It reflects who you are, how you think, how you act. If you improve that, money improves. If you maintain that, money remains the same. It's not about technique. It's about applied mindset. Now let's move to a critical point. You need to stop looking for quick solutions. Because money does not respond well to shortcuts. It responds to consistency. And consistency requires patience. But not passive patience. Active patience. Where you keep acting, even when results haven't shown up yet. Carnegie operated with long-term vision. He didn't make decisions based on now. He thought in terms of accumulated impact. And that changes everything. Because when you think long-term, you make better short-term decisions. Now think, are you making decisions that work today? Or decisions that build tomorrow? Because that difference defines your financial future. Now let's go even deeper. Many people say they want money, but they don't want the process that generates money. They don't want discipline. They don't want consistency. They don't want responsibility. And without that, there is no sustainable wealth. There is luck, and luck doesn't last. Carnegie didn't rely on luck. He relied on system, and system is replicable. Now here's the turning point. Money is not something you earn. It is something you build. You build it through value, through behavior, through decisions. And all that takes time. But it works. It always works. Now here is the closing truth. You are not far from money because of lack of opportunity. You are far because of lack of alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you do, and what you sustain. And when that alignment happens, money stops being effort and becomes consequence, but only for those who sustain the pattern. And this is where everything is defined. You can keep treating money as something external, or accept that it is a direct reflection of you. And when you accept that, you take control. And when you take control, you stop reacting and start building. And those who build don't depend on luck. They depend on pattern, on process, on consistency, and that, when truly applied, changes everything. So from now on, less obsession with money, more focus on who you are becoming. Because in the end, it's not money that defines you. It's you who define the money you can sustain. And when you understand that, the game changes permanently. No return, no illusion, no shortcuts, only construction. And construction, when done right, always produces results. And when you reach this level of construction, you begin to see something even deeper. Money does not grow where there is disorder. It does not stay where there is unconsciousness. It does not multiply where there is no intention. That completely changes how you see your financial reality. Because now it's no longer about how much comes in. It's about how you operate. And operating well is a skill that must be trained, refined, sustained. Andrew Carnegie did not treat money casually. He treated it like a living system, something to observe, just direct, and most importantly, respect. Because when you treat money with negligence, it responds with instability. But when you treat it with intention, it responds with growth. Now understand this precisely. There is no sustainable financial growth without control. And control is not limitation. It is awareness. It is knowing where your money is going, why it is going, and how it is being used. Most people avoid this because facing their financial reality is uncomfortable. But avoiding it is far more expensive because you remain on autopilot. And autopilot repeats patterns, and patterns maintain results. Now let's go deeper. There is a common behavior that destroys financial progress. Inconsistency. You earn more, and then relax. You save a little, and then overspend. You start organized, and then abandon it. And this creates a canceling effect. Any progress is undone by inconsistent decisions. And that creates frustration because it feels like you're moving, but you never get anywhere. Carnegie understood that consistency matters more than intensity. It's not what you do in one day. It's what you sustain every day. And that applies directly to money. Now here is a practical shift. You need to create rules for your financial behavior. Simple rules, but non-negotiable. Because without rules, you negotiate with emotion, and emotion almost always loses to impulse. So you must decide in advance how much to invest, how much to spend, how to act, and follow that, regardless of the situation, because that creates stability, and stability allows growth. Now let's go deeper again. Money requires responsibility, and responsibility is uncomfortable. Because it removes excuses, removes blame, removes justification, and leaves only consequence. And many people avoid financial growth because they don't want that level of responsibility. They prefer to stay small, where the consequences are smaller. But that limits everything. Carnegie did not avoid responsibility. He pursued it because he knew responsibility expands capacity, and capacity expands results. Now think about this. The more money, the more responsibility. And the more responsibility, the higher the standard. So the question is direct. Are you ready to sustain more? Not just earn, but sustain. Because those are different. And sustaining requires internal structure. Now here is the most important closing. Money does not transform you. It reveals you. It reveals your patterns, your habits, your decisions, your discipline. If you are organized, it amplifies that. If you are impulsive, it exposes that. If you are consistent, it rewards that. So the focus was never money itself. It was always you. Who you are, how you think, how you act. Because money only responds. And that is the truth that changes everything. You don't need to chase money. You need to become someone who operates at a level where money is a natural consequence. And that does not happen randomly. It happens through construction, through repetition, through pattern. Now to close definitively, you can keep searching for techniques, shortcuts, quick ways, or you can do what actually works. Change your pattern, change your mindset, change your behavior, and sustain it. Because that is what builds real wealth. Not a one-time gain, but a consistent system. And when that system is working, money stops being unpredictable and becomes a direct result of what you do. And those who reach this level no longer depend on luck. They depend on structure, on clarity, on execution. And that creates something powerful. Predictability. You know that if you keep operating at the same level, the result will come. Because it always does. And that removes anxiety, removes doubt, removes insecurity. Because now it's not guesswork. It's process. And a well-executed process always delivers. So from now on, don't think of money as something distant. Think of it as something that responds directly to you, to your pattern, to your consistency, to your capacity. Because in the end, money is not about having. It's about sustaining. And those who learn to sustain never go back to the starting point. Never again. Because they built something that doesn't depend on moment. It depends on who they became. And that is definitive. And when that becomes clear, you finally stop making the mistake most people make their entire lives, treating money as something external. Because from this point on, you understand that money is not an event, not luck, not something that simply happens. It is a direct reflection of your internal pattern. And that changes everything. Because now, you stop searching for answers outside and start adjusting what is inside. Your thinking, your behavior, your discipline, your decision-making. And that puts you in a position very few reach. Real control. Not control over the world, but control over yourself. And when you control that, external results begin to align. Andrew Carnegie understood that wealth is not accumulated luck. It is applied pattern, repeated behavior, sustained decisions, and that is what makes wealth predictable for those who understand the game. Now there is one final adjustment that closes everything. You need to stop reacting to money and start leading money. Because while you react, you live in effect. You earn, spend, lose, worry, restart. But when you lead, you live in cause. You decide, direct, organize, build. And that changes everything. Because now, you are not trying to fix financial problems. You are building a financial structure. And structure sustains any level of growth. Now think deeply about this. If today a much larger amount of money entered your life, would you keep it or lose it? That question defines everything. Because it shows whether your internal level already matches the external level you desire. If the answer is no, then the focus is not earning more. It is becoming more prepared. Because money without preparation becomes a problem. But money with structure becomes expansion. Carnegie didn't grow just because he earned more. He grew because he was prepared to sustain more. And that made all the difference. Now here is the final truth. Money does not respond to desire. It responds to capacity. You can want a lot, but without structure, you won't sustain it. You can dream big, But without pattern, you won't keep it. And that is not limitation. It is logic. Because everything in life follows coherence. Now this gives you power. Because capacity can be built. Pattern can be adjusted. Structure can be created. And all of that is under your control. So the path is clear. Less focus on earning. More focus on becoming. Less anxiety about results. More discipline in process. Less emotion in decisions. More clarity in execution. Because when you become someone prepared, money stops being a challenge and becomes a consequence. And consequence doesn't need to be forced. It simply happens. Now to close definitively, you don't need to search for the secret of money anymore. You already understand. The secret was never money. It was always pattern. The pattern you think. The pattern you act. The pattern you sustain. And that pattern defines everything. Defines how much you earn. Defines how much you keep. Defines how much you grow. And most importantly, defines whether you move forward or repeat the same cycle. So from now on, everything becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. You adjust the pattern, sustain the behavior, repeat the process, and observe the result. Without rush, without illusion, without shortcuts. Because the real game is played in the long term. And those who understand that don't oscillate, don't panic, don't get lost. They build consistently. And that's why, in the end, few get there. Not because it's impossible, but because few are willing to do what actually works. Now you know. The way you think about money was wrong, but now it's clear. And with clarity comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes power. So use it. Just apply, sustain. Because the money you want is not far away. It is conditioned to the level you choose to operate at. And that decision starts now. And when you truly take that on, there is no more confusion, no more excuses, no more waiting. There is action, consistent, intentional, strategic. And that action, when sustained, builds exactly what you're looking for. Not instantly, but inevitably. And when you reach that point, you realize something powerful. Money was never the problem, never the obstacle, never the limit. It was only the reflection. And now, that reflection finally begins to change. Because you changed. And when you change, everything changes with you. And that is the true ending, where money stops being a question and becomes a natural consequence of who you have become.